Hello and welcome to the Esoteric Survivalist. Before I go on to the main topic, I would like to make a few comments here because I'm structuring the presentation to emphasize the nuances without which we can fall into misunderstanding all too easily. So we're going to do a review of the three disciplines or restrictions of the first subdivision of Raja Yoga, Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. They're called yamas. But before we get into that, I'd like to say that everything that I'm talking about here is to help cultivate, at this level 1, a healthy psychology even through our traumas and afflictions. We don't have to resolve all of our issues, or even most of our issues, in order to be able to move through life in a positive manner and keep progressing in that way. So we're setting a healthy foundation in this sense. As it stands, the presentation has been too short for explaining the nuances so as to integrate them with the main theme. So let's get to it and briefly go over each principle of reining in our compulsions. And one of the nuances here is, what is a compulsion? The modern term would be programming. Compulsions, of course, reach deep into the subconscious to regulate its expression through positive and negative reinforcement. We know this as reward and punishment, or the carrot and the stick. My ambition here is to take the level of the discussion to the point one would find in a seminar-type presentation or otherwise monetized lecture series. Or perhaps one visits a person one considers wise and will even pay to listen to that wisdom in the hopes that it can rub off on them. But I don't believe that's how it works, and even the wise would tell you this, that you need to put in your own effort. All the seminars do and all of these lectures and everything is, at most they would give you a demonstration, but they are basically informing you so you can do the work yourself. Nobody else will do this. We are not looking for saviors here. That's a whole other thing. And depending on that requires a different mindset. I'm not bashing religion here, but I do disagree with its universal appeal. Religion is something for maybe the majority, but not for everyone. And that doesn't mean we resort to atheism, because that's just another form of religion. Religion just means bondage, something that ties us. And all of our ideologies tie us down. Even the ideology of not having an ideology, which is itself a presumption, something we expressed in the last episode regarding the fact that presumptions lead to forms of violence. And the word violence, of course, means violation. So we violate when we make presumptions. But presumptions are not just coming to conclusions, whether prematurely or in any other manner. They have a specific quality. So I'd like to continue my little introduction, which is more like a parenthesis, as I move through this talk. So, quality of production notwithstanding, conveying esoteric information is not something to be taken lightly. So I'm not catering to the desire for power, nor to the lust for enlightenment. This isn't about methods to attain physical intimacy or material wealth. This is aimed to assist in standing flexible yet firm, to brave the challenges of life on the one hand, and to cultivate the mental space to move through the challenges without being worn down or corrupted. Then you can decide if extra measures are needed. Then one can open to higher intelligence, which we will discuss as well. Then one can even cultivate, not like a spiritual athlete or someone who is depriving themselves for it, but like a health-conscious individual who exercises to sustain physical health and vitality. That being said, I would not underestimate the information. It is born out of 4 decades of inner quest, research, and life application. And it's being tested on an ongoing basis to this day because there are challenges, and you don't get rid of the challenges. It's like I'm lifting weights, for example, to build muscle, and I build muscle. But when I stop lifting weights, the muscle goes down. I'm not going to have this strength permanently unless I consistently nourish it. I may not have to be as disciplined as I was in the beginning, because when you make a transition from one state, a default state, to a state that's more enhanced, more activated, more resonant, as it were, more alive, you need to acclimate even to that change, just like any other change. Now, I'm not directing this just toward practitioners of esoteric methodology, even though a mild methodology, all right, let's say a mild methodology will be presented here. But I'm also wanting to refer to those with some familiarity, not complete ignorance of esoteric matters and esoteric themes, because this isn't an introduction by any means. However, esoteric themes are human themes. It's just a part of humanity that we don't emphasize, and we often demonize it, or we idolize it. Sometimes we bloat it beyond where it needs to be. That's where compulsions come in. Somebody thinks, oh, I can just chant this or do that, and my problems will be solved, or I'll be able to get something. And that kind of short-sightedness can be dangerous here, because you're opening your perception. This is even more risky in some ways than taking drugs, because when you take drugs, the experience goes, after the drug's gone, you come back to normal, unless you do something hectic and abuse them. But one drug experience of whatever it is will bring you back to normal, unless it's something extremely toxic. But when you cultivate, you don't do that. You're actually pushing, moving. It's like exercising consistently. Your muscles will be stronger, your breathing will be freer, and all of that. And even if you want to be more afflicted, it'll take some time to get back to your old state. Maybe not as much time as it was with your exercising, but still. So I'm directing this to those with some familiarity, even if it's just through hearsay, the media, those around them, depending on the culture. So let's get on with the topic at hand now, which is about how to stand upright in the world where the odds are stacked against us, or it seems that way. But what they are is stacked against our heart's desires, the true heart's desires. Notice I don't say head's desires, belly's desires, or genitals' desires. This is the heart. And the heart is the spiritual center of the being. It is the physical representation of the seat of the soul. Although technically the brain, the belly, the whole body is actually the seat of the soul. It's kind of what we might call holographic. It's spread everywhere and non-local. So in any case, I don't want to give the impression that we have to be completely skeptical about everything when we encounter things. I'm speaking about presumption. And presumption is resolved through reverse dogmatism. Reverse dogmatism takes everything as it is, and it removes the preconceptions, but it does not deny the perception of the present moment. So if you're being hurt, you're not going to say, wait, let me just process this a little bit while I'm being punched or kicked or insulted. No, you want to act as soon as possible. But in order to come to the position where you can act as soon as possible in the right manner, and not a manner that's driven by the craziness of the situation or your reflex thought processes or internal habits or subconscious trauma-based reflexes. You want to be able to respond like a martial artist responds, automatically, but in a way that is cultivated because it is the right way. And if it's not healthy, it's not going to be done. So I've been hearing a lot about this notion called delayed satisfaction. And it's something I've heard, and all I see with that notion And I'm sorry if I disagree with those who promote it. It's just another version of the same old song of repression, because most people don't like to think in a complex manner. It's just the way the brain works. We save energy that way. So whenever something afflicts us, some kind of compulsion or addiction, just like the pleasure principle can be addictive and compulsive, and it is so when we use it as a form of self-medication. That's what all these bad habits are. They're a form of misguided self-medication. The same thing with drug addictions. The addiction itself is not the misguided self-medication, but the use that leads to it is. We're trying to escape what afflicts us in any way we can. And usually we will choose the simplest ways first, and the ways that are most available. So we want to avoid compulsion, so we run into repression. And then repression does its damage, and then we go into compulsion, and we wonder why. And then back into repression and compulsion, and the pendulum keeps swinging as we beat ourselves up. And maybe for a moment, the pendulum will pass through the midpoint where we actually can have a second of clarity that neither of these two extremes is going to really help us here. We need to find a middle way where we are actually seeking pleasure for the right reasons and avoiding pain for the right reasons. Because we're not avoiding the pain, we're actually confronting it in an intelligent manner. Somebody says, no, throw yourself into the fray. No, only idiots do that. And heroes. But heroes are strong. Heroes are empowered. Heroes are inspired, and they usually can make it through. We are not heroes. That's why we admire heroes. But to keep this going, reverse dogmatism is a sophisticated art of discerning to the point that we don't act in a compulsive manner. And if we don't act in a compulsive manner, chances are we will not cause suffering in ourselves or others. But this is another nuance that needs to be explained, because if what we do causes suffering, it does so because we are redressing an imbalance. And if someone is adapted to imbalance, that causes suffering generally in themselves and others, and somebody else redresses the imbalance, then the first person is going to be, their compulsion will encounter a resistance to its expression. And compulsions might as well be not intelligent, but they have a life of their own. They're like biological parasites. If you have a biological parasite, and parasites like sugar, for example, if you don't eat sugar, you're going to feel crazy when the parasite is the one that's protesting inside of you. It's affecting your brain, it's affecting your blood, it's affecting everything and all your organs, and of course it's going to affect your mood. So compulsions can be considered as programs, they can be considered as entities, depending on your level of approach. Now, our level of approach right now is still psychological. So let's just consider these as a kind of programming. But this programming has a certain very complicated feedback with the rest of our being. So if we're not presumptuous, if we don't come into making excuses for compulsions and programming, then eventually our vision clarifies. And it's more flexible and intuitive based. So we perceive the truth in that manner, and then we move in and process the truth with our reasoning faculties, which we should never deny, we should never curtail, but we should also apply them in a way that does not lead to violating ourselves, others, the environment, and the truth, which is actually another discipline. So, in all of this, we know that the first yama, or the first yama or discipline, the first discipline is essentially nonviolence. But that's misunderstood. it's far deeper than that. We're talking about yoga here. Yoga is not about behavioral modification. It's about deprogramming. That's what the sutras are into. If you can deprogram, then your natural being can open up to the world, provided you choose to do so. It doesn't just happen automatically most of the time. You need to reinforce it. And when that happens, when you reinforce it, then it goes back to the psychological zone and helps to digest this programming. And as it's digested, the resources that the program has sucked off of you are released and you become more empowered like you should have been. This isn't about taking resources. And again, that's another yama, which says, don't steal, thou shalt not steal. That's not what the yama is about, though. We're not talking behavioral modifications. We're talking about making the compulsion of stealing disappear, non-stealing, through the application of integrity. Well, why doesn't it tell us that? Because they're aphorisms, and it's very possible that these are meant to be notes of an oral tradition that was probably in danger of disappearing for whatever reason, and a teacher would need to kind of look them up. So the disciple or student or whatever, learning to practice these things, learning to apply them, will be able to do so in a way that balances intuition and reason. Now, in all of this, we're just sticking to the first yama. I wanted to review all three of them, but I don't want to rush through. So let's just see how far we can go. We're not going to review this next time, but I want to use it more as an example as to how these disciplines are to be approached. It's not simple behavior modification. It is a whole process of how you get into a zone of preconceptions that are probably programmed into you, and these preconceptions that you may think are rational, but sometimes you think they're instinctive because they're automatic, it's still programming. We need to get in there and disentangle ourselves from this kind of thing. And when we do, the programming and other people may respond. So people will say, oh, you're not like the person you used to be. Or I see you've changed and it's not really for the better. Somehow they clash, but you're not the one changing for the worse. They're challenged to change for the better and resisting it. But there are still ways to compensate for that. So you don't have to be a threat to your friends, family, neighbor, or maybe trigger them into some kind of disagreement. That's a more advanced level. That'll come into level 2 when we start discussing it. But we need to lay a firm foundation on this one. In the next episode, I will get into the second yama, which is like, tell the truth. No lies, because the yamas are presented as negatives. So yes, the no lie means it's what we need to remove from our lives, to negate it, but the negation of this kind of thing can only happen through a positive, which is authenticity. And the Yoga Sutras have this. They are cumulative. So if I speak of the first yama, it's going to lead to the second one. So when we do reach a point where we can be discerning enough and balanced enough so we don't dive into preconceptions, even if everybody else tells us we know better. That's the point we need to reach. And then we can see that under most situations, we can get by without violating ourselves or others. And when I say violating ourselves, I include allowing ourselves to be violated by others. There is a sensitivity these days, and so we have terms like microaggression. Microaggression is not violation. Because then what? Then we have to be completely passive, because microaggression is motion. Aggression just means moving intensely to the point that it can't violate. But when you move intensely in a tiny way, you move a lot less. So we need to be aware of manipulative conceptions. And that's another thing that reverse dogmatism will help us with. I think I've discussed enough for today. Like I said, I'm extending this to approximately 20 minutes. So, because these topics need to be gotten into in greater detail. They need to be discussed in a more coherent manner than rambling for 10 minutes, trying to get the thoughts together in a way that they'll make sense and reach a conclusion, but that doesn't happen because they are too deep. So, let me just thank everybody for listening. And please stay tuned for how all of this progresses. For now, Magus out.